It was just another ordinary day in New York City. People rushed along the sidewalks, cars honked, and the sounds of the city seemed to never stop. In the midst of all this hustle and bustle, a dog stood still, in the same spot as always. He wasn't chasing anyone, nor was he wagging his tail. He simply stared at the street, as if he were waiting for something or someone. People passed by him without paying much attention, just another dog in a city full of distractions. But he didn't leave that spot, not in the rain, not in the cold. His fur was dirty, and he was visibly thinner. A woman who passed by every day started to notice the dog. He always seemed to be looking in the same direction, as if he were waiting for someone to come back for him. But who? And why did he stay there, refusing to move? No one knew where he had come from, but one thing was certain. That dog wasn't lost. He was waiting. And it didn't seem like he was going to give up anytime soon. Before continuing, I want to ask you to just check if you are already subscribed to the channel. Here you will find moving stories like this which show the love and loyalty of dogs in a unique way. Max's life, a medium-sized dog, was simple and happy. He lived with his family in a spacious house in the suburbs of New York City. He ran freely in the yard, played with the kids, and at night he rested at his owner's feet. They always treated him like part of the family. But like many families, they faced unexpected changes. Over time, things became tough. The family had to move to a smaller apartment in the heart of the city. The dad got a new job, and the high cost of living in the city made it impossible to keep the house. The decision to move was made quickly, and soon they realized that in the small apartment, there wouldn't be enough space for Max. With broken hearts, the family knew they couldn't take him with them. They spent days trying to find a new family for Max. They didn't want to give him up to just anyone. They needed to make sure he would be loved and well cared for. After some searching, they found a couple that seemed perfect. They lived in a cozy house on the outskirts of the city, had experience with dogs, and promised to give Max all the love and attention he deserved. The goodbye was hard. The kids cried, and even the parents, usually more composed, had faces marked by sadness. Max, confused, was taken away in a car he didn't recognize, looking out the window as his home, his yard, and his family were left behind. In the first few days, the new family did everything to make Max feel at home. They fed him the best dog food, took him for walks, and even bought him new toys. But Max didn't seem happy. He ate little, didn't play, and spent most of his time lying by the door, as if waiting for someone to come in. They thought it was just a matter of time before he adjusted. But weeks turned into months, and nothing changed. Max remained distant, and sometimes during walks he tried to run away, always returning to the same place, the neighborhood where he lived with his first family. The new family began to realize that, no matter how much they loved him, Max didn't see them as his true home. I saw that you haven't left your like yet. This is very important so that YouTube continues to share our content with exciting dog stories. If you love dogs and are enjoying this story, leave a like, it's free. Thanks. Now let's continue. Max didn't know what he had done wrong. He didn't understand why his family, whom he loved with all his heart, had left him. The first days in the new house were confusing. Everything was different. The smells, the sounds, the voices. The couple who adopted him were kind, always speaking to him affectionately and treating him well. But something was missing. Max couldn't feel the same connection he had with his old family. He spent hours lying by the front door, waiting, always with watchful eyes, as if at any moment the door would open, and those familiar faces he loved so much would appear, smiling at him. But days went by, and that never happened. His new owners tried everything to cheer him up. They bought new toys, tried playing with him in the yard, but Max showed no interest. He only ate enough to survive, and when he wasn't lying by the door, he was sprawled out in the yard, staring at the horizon. The cold weather was starting to approach, and even on freezing nights, he preferred to stay outside, as if he were waiting for something. Months passed slowly. Max began to lose weight. He no longer had the same energy. His gaze was always distant, as if his mind were elsewhere, the place where he was happy. The new family started to worry seriously. They took him to the vet, but physically, Max was fine. The diagnosis was clear: canine depression. The vet explained that Although they were taking good care of Max, he seemed to be suffering deeply from the separation from his first family. Nothing seemed to fill the emptiness Max felt. On every walk, he pulled hard on the leash, always trying to return to the same neighborhood. The new family began to notice a pattern. Max always tried to escape in a specific direction. They decided to investigate, and on one of the walks, they let him off the leash to see what he would do. Max ran desperate, as if he had finally found a chance to go back home. He didn't stop until he reached a park near his old house. There, he sat and waited. The new family, watching from a distance, felt their hearts ache. They tried to call him, but Max didn't move. He was focused, staring at the street that led to his former family's house. Max would stay there for hours, waiting. Even with the arrival of winter, he didn't give up. Going back home to his old family was all he wanted. The new family began to understand what was happening. Max didn't see them as his owners, and probably never would. They treated him with love, but it wasn't enough to fill the void in his heart. What he wanted was beyond their reach. It was simple. He wanted his first family back. No matter how hard they tried, they realized that the only thing that truly made Max happy was the hope of seeing those he loved again. The new family started to wonder, would it be time to do something about it? Max's suffering didn't lessen, and the loyalty he showed, even after so much time, was undeniable. They knew they needed to make a decision. Max continued to sit by the side of the street, even as the snow began to fall. His eyes, always fixed on the horizon, seemed to silently ask, "Do they still remember me?" The new family watched from a distance, their hearts heavy. They had tried everything, but they knew that Max wasn't complete there. Could it be that, after all this time, his first family still thought of him? And more importantly, what would they do if they knew about the sadness that the loyal dog carried? The question lingered in the air. Was it too late for Max to reunite with those he loved? The couple who adopted Max, Sarah and Tom, didn't understand what was going wrong. They had always had dogs and knew how to care for them. From day one, they did everything to make Max feel like part of the family. They bought a comfortable bed, new toys, and even created a special space in the yard where he could run freely. But nothing seemed to work. Sarah remembered the first few weeks when she thought Max just needed time. She took him for long walks in the park, talked to him, and even tried to play. Tom, on the other hand, always looked for new ways to cheer him up, offering treats and affection. But Max remained distant, always with that lost look, as if he were somewhere else. At first, they tried to believe it was just an adjustment phase. But as months went by, they began to realize that Max was stuck on something from his past, something they couldn't replace. What more could they do? They had given him everything a dog could want, except for the one thing he truly desired: his original family. Even so, Sarah and Tom didn't give up on Max, but silently they began to wonder if they were doing what was best for him. Have you ever been in a similar situation with a pet? How would you handle it if your dog couldn't adapt to a new home? Leave your comment and share your experience. The days grew shorter, and the cold began to bite. The streets of New York City filled with snow, and the biting wind swept through the buildings, carrying a chill that froze one to the bone. Max, however, seemed unfazed. He continued to sit in the same spot, always looking at the street, as if he were still waiting for his first family to appear. Not even the harsh winter made him give up. Sarah and Tom, worried, began bringing him inside more often. They placed an extra bed near the fireplace, trying to warm him up both inside and out. But even so, Max kept asking to go out, and when they let him, he inevitably headed to the same location, always waiting. Winter brought snowstorms, and the cold became almost unbearable. Max, with his dirty and thinning coat, faced it all in silence. He trembled, but didn't give in. Sarah watched from the window, her heart heavy. She knew that if they let him, he would stay out there all day, on the sidewalk, ignoring the cold and discomfort, simply waiting. Sometimes, she even wondered what was going through his mind. How could a dog be so persistent? How could he continue to sit there, day after day, waiting for something that might never happen? Tom, increasingly frustrated, suggested it might be time to accept that they couldn't fill the void Max felt. They were doing their best, but nothing seemed enough. Max continued to lose weight, more, and his sadness seemed to grow with each passing day, just like the cold outside. Winter brought not only physical cold, but also a sense of hopelessness for Sarah and Tom. They tried everything: new walks, new games, even winter clothes for Max. But nothing changed the fact that he simply couldn't forget his first family. And as winter progressed, Max seemed to sink deeper into his sorrow. The snow fell heavier each day, and despite everything, Max continued to wait. The mystery remained: how much longer could he endure? And more importantly, was it possible to do something to help him before it was too late? Do you believe that animals can feel longing like we do? What would you do if you saw a dog waiting for so long for someone? After months of watching Max wither away before their eyes, Sarah and Tom decided they needed to take action. They had tried everything, but the dog continued to live as if he were stuck in the past, waiting for something that never came. One day, after yet another frustrating attempt to cheer him up, Sarah, with a heavy heart, suggested what they had been avoiding from the start: reaching out to his original family. Tom hesitated. They didn't want the original family to feel guilty. After all, they had made the decision to give up Max out of necessity. But the situation was becoming unsustainable. Max wasn't just a sad dog, he was losing his will to live. With that in mind, Tom finally made the call. When Max's former owner answered, her voice sounded surprised but warm. The conversation began politely, but soon took a turn when Tom explained the reason for the call. He described Max's behavior, his constant sadness, and his frequent attempts to return to the old neighborhood. On the other end of the line, there was a long silence, followed by a heavy sigh. Sarah watched Tom as he spoke, and she could see his expression change as the conversation progressed. Then, she heard something that sent chills down her spine: the sound of crying. Max's former owner was in tears. She had no idea that Max was suffering so much. The family had always thought he would adapt well, surrounded by love and care, but they never imagined he would miss them this much. Tom's words came out in bursts. He didn't quite know how to continue. He still waits for you. Every day, he sits and looks at the street, as if he's waiting for you to show up. The woman's voice, now choked with sobs, was firm. We're coming to get him. There was no hesitation. The original family knew they couldn't let Max suffer any longer. They didn't care about the small space of their apartment. It didn't matter if it would be cramped. What mattered was that Max still loved them, and they loved him too. And now, they knew they had to bring him back home. Tom and Sarah sat in silence for a few moments after the call ended. They knew they were doing the right thing, but that didn't make the goodbye any less painful. Max, who always seemed so distant, would now have the chance to reunite with those he had waited for so long. The reunion was near, and everyone could feel that something special was about to happen. The day of the reunion finally arrived. Sarah and Tom waited patiently as Max's original family navigated the traffic of New York City. The approaching car was filled with anxiety and excitement, but also with regret. The children, who had cried when they left Max, could hardly wait to hug him again. In the front seat, the mother held her trembling hands in her lap, unable to contain her thoughts about what she would say upon seeing the dog they had given up. Outside Sarah and Tom's house, Max was restless. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he seemed to sense something in the air. His eyes, which had long seemed empty, were now focused on the street in a different way. When the original family's car turned the corner, Max perked up his ears. The cold winter wind carried distant sounds, but he recognized the sound of the engine even before he saw the car. His body tensed, and for a brief moment he hesitated, as if he couldn't believe it. The car stopped in front of the house, and before the door could fully open, Max was already running. He didn't need a leash or command. Sarah and Tom, watching from a distance, knew that the moment Max had waited for had finally arrived. When the car door swung open, the children rushed out, calling Max's name amid laughter and tears. And Max, who had seemed so distant and apathetic for months, now ran with an energy that no one had seen in him since he arrived at the new home. He leapt towards the children, licking their faces, shaking his entire body with joy. It was as if all the weight of the months of waiting had been lifted from his shoulders in an instant. The mother got out of the car shortly after, tears silently streaming down her face. She knelt on the ground and Max ran to her, pausing for a moment before resting his head in her lap, just like he used to. The father, who followed closely behind, was speechless. He crouched down to stroke the dog who had never stopped waiting for them, and Max, without hesitation, lay down beside them, as if he knew he was finally home. Sarah and Tom watched from a distance, their eyes misty. They knew they were doing the right thing, but the scene before them was so powerful that it was hard not to be moved. Max, the dog who had seemed lost and sad for so long, had finally reunited with the reason for his loyalty. The family hugged Max for long minutes, as if they were trying to make up for lost time. The children laughed and cried at the same time, while the dog wagged his tail non-stop, as if trying to say that everything was okay now, that the wait had been worth it. After the reunion, Sarah and Tom approached. Max's mother, still emotional, repeatedly thanked them, unsure how to express all the gratitude she felt. "We should have never left him, but now we know that won't happen again." Sarah smiled, fighting back tears. "He always knew where his home was, and now you do too." The car pulled away once more, but this time Max was inside. Lying in the back seat between the children, he was exhausted but finally at peace. As the car faded into the distance, Sarah and Tom watched until it disappeared from view. Max was finally where he had always wanted to be. The sadness that had accompanied him for so long had vanished. The winter remained cold, but inside that car, Max's heart was warmed, surrounded by the people he had never forgotten. Max, the dog who never gave up waiting, finally found the peace he had long sought. This story is a powerful reminder of the loyalty and unconditional love that animals can feel, something that we humans often underestimate. While many might have lost hope after months of separation, Max proved that his devotion to his original family was unbreakable. For Sarah and Tom, the goodbye was difficult, but they knew they had done the right thing. Max's happiness upon reuniting with his family made it clear that sometimes true love is stronger than any material comfort or well-meaning effort. They also learned something valuable, that animals, just like people, have hearts capable of holding deep memories and emotions. Now, in the small apartment where Max lives with his first family, the space may be tight, but love overflows. The children, who once cried when they left Max behind, now sleep with him at the foot of their bed as he watches over them affectionately. The mother, who felt so much remorse, now feels at peace, knowing that Max is where he belongs. And Max? He is finally at ease, knowing that after so much waiting, he is back in the place he has always considered home. On that first night back home, Max couldn't stop looking at each member of his family. He walked from room to room, as if he wanted to make sure they were really there, that this wasn't just a dream. When he entered the children's room, Max lay down between them, feeling the warmth of the small bodies he had protected so much in the past. The children, still sobbing with joy and emotion, hugged him tightly, their tear-streaked faces buried in Max's soft fur. He closed his eyes, listening to the sound of their gentle breaths, and a deep peace filled his heart. For the first time in months, he slept soundly, without fear of being left behind again. The mother, sitting on the living room sofa, couldn't hold back her tears. She knew that Max had suffered, and the weight of guilt crushed her. Looking at the dog, now asleep with the children, she felt a lump in her throat, and silent sobs took over her body. Her husband tried to comfort her, but he was also struggling with his own tears. "We should have never left him," she whispered through her sobs. "He waited for us all this time, and we abandoned him." The husband hugged her, his own voice wavering. "But he's here now, and we'll never leave him again," he replied, as a solitary tear rolled down his cheek. They both felt the weight of the past, but also the incomparable joy of having Max back. Max, sensing the atmosphere around him so filled with love and regret, seemed to understand what was happening. That night, he slowly got up and walked to the living room, where his parents were embraced. With slow steps, he approached and rested his head on his mother's lap, looking up at her with eyes that seemed to know more than anyone could imagine. She wrapped him in her arms, and the tears she had been trying to hold back burst forth in deep sobs. Max didn't need words. He had already forgiven, because for him, love was simple and eternal. He was back, and that was all that mattered. Thank you for watching until the end. If you were touched by this story, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos and can be part of our family that loves dog stories.